is just such a simple but useful frame, is to think when we're engaging, are we consulting, are we collaborating, or is it a child or community-led process?
Are you interested in involving the younger generation into decision-making? What do you think about meaningful involvement? How can we differentiate between consultation, collaboration, and children-led projects? Stay tuned for answers from Dr. Tiff Williams.
What is the future for cities? Do you want to learn more about them? Do you want to know how others think about them? Do you want to be part of the conversation? Then this is the right place.
Welcome to What is the Future for Cities podcast. Today, I will interview Dr. Tiffany Williams, an action-focused public health professional. We will talk about her vision for the future of cities, the citizens' role in the city, the importance of children for visioning, transparency in engagement, and many more. So let's start with a proper introduction. Tiffany Williams is a PhD qualified, action-focused public health professional who thrives on complexity and collaboration. She has over a decade of experience in community-based projects aiming to improve well-being, with a special interest in the intersection of health and local environments. Diverse work and volunteer pursuits have taken her on an incredible journey through remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities of Australia to the outer islands of Vanuatu in the South Pacific, and now Aotearoa New Zealand. Naturally, this places equity, empathy, and strengths-based approaches at the heart of everything she does. Her PhD research focused on actualizing children's ideas for health-promoting neighbourhoods from co-design, so she knows a thing or two about facilitating interdisciplinary collaboration, engaging diverse groups, and bringing great ideas to life. Beyond her professional life, she loves hiking, yoga, surfing, and travel, embracing an active outdoors lifestyle that reflects her values and energizes her for the work she loves. And with that, Tiff, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. I highly appreciate your appearance on the podcast. And let's jump right in. What does the future of cities mean to you?
Thank you, Fanny, and thank you for having me. I think as much as the future of cities is around the humans that are in the cities, which I know is part of your practice and the vision for this podcast, I guess the future of cities then is our children and is our young people. And that's my perspective from my years of experience, but also my recent PhD research, where we were focused on children and young people. And really, they are the future of this earth, but also of our cities.
It's amazing that you started with the future is already here because we already have the next generation and the youth and the children. I understand what you say, that humans in the cities are the important factor. Mm-hmm. Then what does the city mean to you?
I think certainly more than humans, which is another really large space that I spent a lot of time in my research exploring and thinking and writing about, was a real more than human view of the city, of our local environments, of our urban environments. That a more than human view actually means we're thinking about all the agents, all the entities that make up the city, both human and non-human. Certainly humans as agents create and shape cities, including children and young people. But there's so much more than humans that make and create our cities.
Then who are these other agents?
Oh, that's such a great question. And something I've, again, delved into a lot. But we're thinking about things that have agency, that have influence. Maybe more traditionally, we'd think about species living other than humans. We've got animals, microorganisms, we've got soil, all of those really rich non-human living species. But there's also elements, especially emerging ones like technology. So the invention of AI, that's something with agency that influences where we are and what happens in the world. Weather systems, patterns, climate. These are all elements of our human, non-human world that morph together in webs and different connections to create what we know as the city. And of course, more landscapes beyond the city as well.
Do you have a hard limit on the city in your imagination? Is there a line where the city ends?
That's an interesting question because I come to this work from a public health background. My entry into this world was really looking at the intersection of local environments, so the places that we live, work, play, socialise, of course smaller for children, broader for adults, just because of how far they can travel independently. And so definitions of cities and of urban centres and rurality is something that I'm actually relatively new to, probably compared with people listening in here on the podcast. And so in my research, anyway, we used quite a broad definition of cities, neighbourhood, urban centres, really focusing around how people engage more than how we define them.
We will get back to the young generation because that's freaking important and interesting. You said that agents who can influence the city itself. And one of the biggest resistance I hear from people where I talk about my research, my passion about the future of cities, and we can change the future of cities, we can create the future of cities, is that people don't agree with, yes, we can influence the city. So my question to you is, in your experience from public health and from your research, can we influence the city? Do you think we do influence the city?
Do we influence the city or does the city influence us? But in the way that cities would always be the same if they weren't being constantly shaped and reformed and changed. I know that we're all watching ways that, say, changing weather patterns, changing how cities work, how they operate, where we're accessing resources, where waterways are. So I think we're watching some of those non-humans in action right now, shaping our cities. Not to mention amazing young people and adults as well, who are playing really important roles in that future vision of the places that they want to live, that they want to call home, where they want to learn and work and play and socialise. My personal view is that there is certainly shaping of cities happening by humans and non-humans within them.
Is this influence from the human side obviously a conscious influence?
I certainly think from the professionals working in the space, yes. The everyday person out living and being in the world who doesn't have a work or a professional role in the future of cities specifically, whether they know it or not, they are still playing a role in shaping cities. Even just thinking examples of how people use spaces in the city, how they choose to engage or how they leave a space, how they prioritise something, how they vocalise feedback on something in the city. That's all ways of shaping and engaging, even if that's not conscious for people not working in this space, but people that call cities home, which is so much of the global community.
Then let's unpack a bit what is the role of humans in shaping the future of cities. And I'm not specifically talking about professionals because, yes, designers have some roles which they don't know about and they should. Yes, professionals have roles which they should know about, but they don't. But what do you think is the role of the normal citizen who is living in the city, who is using these spaces to create a better future for cities?
Something I would love to share on this topic is around children and young people. If we start there, an element that I've really unpacked over the last few years for myself and in relation to local environments in our cities is this idea that there's two really broad categories of participation in how we shape and engage in our cities. And one of those is our everyday participation. That's the everyday participation of children and young people in where and how they engage, making decisions, using spaces, not using spaces, how they travel, how they play, how they explore, how they learn, how they use natural resources and built elements of the environment as well. That's their everyday participation. And that's really important, just as much, if not more, than their participation in formal or more structured decision-making. So thinking about opportunities where young people might get to have a say or they might be involved in a consultation process, in a co-design process, something of that nature as well. So there's the everyday ways that people are shaping and participating, and then there's also the more formal ways. Part of the reason I think that's really important to consider and to keep top of mind is that often the more formal structures, our more Western dominant, maybe colonial structures, perhaps not always as inclusive as what they could be. And so then it seems like some groups or some communities are less involved in shaping the places that they live, work and play, where they're still participating every day, but maybe just some of those formal structures haven't been created in a way, especially for children, that feel safe and welcoming, engaging, supported. It's a balancing and interesting mix of both of those things, but recognizing that everyone every day is participating in some way.
I really like this everyday participation because it's very clear from even the expression that even if you are not conscious of it, you are participating just by being in the city. Why do you think children's and the young generations thinking are important? You mentioned that the future is the children, so that's clear. Are there any other reasons why children's and the young generations thinking are important?
I can think so many reasons. They're the future and they're the current. So a view of children and young people that sees them as not becoming adults, where they then can be great citizens and do adult things and participate in adult ways, but they're just working towards that. They're both the future, but they've also got this incredible expertise and experience of the places that they live, work and play and school and learn that's current and that's right now. A few of the reasons I can think that are most important that we get children and young people's views and really incorporate them into what happens in cities is that they've got this often an amazing inclusive view where they're thinking, and my research found this, and there's other great research on this topic as well, that children think in more than human ways. They're not just thinking of themselves, they're not just thinking of other children, they're thinking of all different human groups in the community. They're thinking of people who are homeless, they're thinking of the older generation, they're thinking of people who've newly arrived to their home country, and as well as that, they're thinking of non-humans. So really focused around plants, animals, waterways, all of these things that are our non-human components of cities as well. So something that's really special and I think really important about children's views is that they think really holistically. I think that can move cities forward in directions that we can't anticipate and would have amazing outcomes for humans and non-humans into the future.
I appreciate so much that they are the future, but they are also current. I would love to understand whether you have seen a difference in thinking, in this holistic thinking in children you interacted with. Because I would assume, based on my personal experience from educational system I went through, that at some point children lose this kind of holistic thinking and this kind of, okay, let's think creatively, because the current education system, in my opinion, doesn't encourage creativity. It's more about, okay, you need to fix into this box. I'm curious whether you have seen a specific age, a specific educational level where the children lose this kind of thinking, whether you have any good ideas how not to force children to lose this kind of thinking.
It's a really great question, Fanny. And my research looked specifically at children aged 5 to 13 years, which is often associated with that broad, really caring thinking about others. Not to say that younger children or that older children don't think about others, but there's a real sense of possibility and openness in that age range, which offers a really unique opportunity. Schools, such an interesting topic because often schools give this great environment and structure for professionals or wider community groups to engage with children, but also, exactly as you said, children in most mainstream education systems have a way that they're expected to be in those settings. And my experience, which I've reflected on, of being in schools, asking broad and open questions of children, bringing them into creative process, inviting their participation on health and health promoting environments, is that it can be tricky to support a really open way of thinking, to support children as loud and as disruptive and exploring ideas. And also particularly in schools, it's tricky to support children's non-participation when you're having some of these conversations, because if they're choosing not to join an activity, Maybe it means the question hasn't landed. Maybe it feels irrelevant. Maybe the activity wasn't set up in a way that feels fun or current or exciting for them. In schools, especially when you're coming in with questions and activities, children are being encouraged to participate respectfully, whereas an alternative view would be that either way they're expressing themselves, whether they're choosing to join or choosing not to join. Just a caution or a reflection there around the potential influence that a school setting might have if you're trying to have some really open, exciting, future-focused conversations with students.
This would be a very hard question, and I'm not sure whether you can answer it at all. I had Amelia Gaskell talking about her environmental anxiety, and she is 21 years old. She was when we talked at university, and she expressed that during her school and the first year of university, she began to feel anxiety about the environment and about sustainability and whatever. And I'm curious whether your cohort, there were any acknowledgement of what's happening in the wider world, or they were thinking more about their own specific environment and the children were more concerned about their local healthy environment. I'm just curious whether they were also involved in a bigger picture thinking.
You're right, Penny, that my research, we were really asking children in an open way, but to focus on what health means to them. And then that was the jumping off point to how does their neighbourhood help them and others to be healthy. There were so many ideas generated around those specific questions. Thinking back now, there wasn't a big conversation around the wider world, but likely because we asked a question in that way that was around their neighbourhood. So they were thinking about their places that they go and enjoy and school and be with their family and their friends. But something really interesting that did come up in terms of the wider picture was the framing of that question: how does your neighbourhood help you and others to be healthy? And I think potentially the assumption most people would hold is that if you ask about others, children maybe think about other children or other humans. But actually children thought about others, plants, animals, bees, all of these things that also exist in their world. One example that springs to mind is that walking your dog, something you do with your friends and family, so it's an activity of connection. But then more than that, walking the dog keeps you and the dog healthy. So there's something in that example of it's not just about keeping them as the child healthy. They were thinking about what's going to keep my dog healthy as well. So just a small example of thinking when you ask children, they do jump to those broader connections. And I'm certain if we asked that question, there would have been reflections on the wider world.
Could you give us some examples of these ideas they were talking about in improving their environment? Because I would love to hear what children want to do in their own environment to make it more healthy.
Yeah, and I have to make sure that in these show notes we get a link to the full article so that your listeners can see how we structured those conversations with the children. And what I would say overarching is that children thought really broadly about their local environments, and they weren't dug down on one particular topic. They had wide-ranging views across categories such as friendly streets, no smoking, staying fit, staying active, healthy foods, or the food environment more generally. Some reflections around healthcare and health services, which of course what we saw in this work was potentially some influences from the world around them, because that was conducted in the midst of COVID. So it was top of mind around infection control and access to hospitals naturally. But then also too, there were aspects and elements around keeping the environment healthy, nature aspects, which was language that the children used. Also, we could see that influence from the classroom if there'd been a focus on plastic, for example, for that particular school term, that was top of mind for children. So that kind of synergy between what they were learning at school and in the classroom, coming back, then thinking out to the wider world and then back into the questions we were asking, which was really cool to see them taking up some of those really important topics, which here in Aotearoa New Zealand, schools do a really amazing job of keeping environmental issues top of mind. and forms part of curriculum and discussions regularly. So we saw that reflected back in the conversations.
I would assume that the school's role is a big opportunity, but first, what are the 3 biggest fears or concerns regarding the future of cities for you?
I'm going to start with my top one, which is missing meaningful involvement of young people. So missing the opportunity to find out what matters to them, how they want to be involved, what their vision is, because the reality is, this might be controversial, but the people making most of the decisions today, they're not going to be the ones living in the future of that city. It's actually the children and the young people of today who are going to call that place home into the future. So that's why that really matters and is top of mind for me. Another fear or concern is that our cities continue to place humans at the centre. We see it in a lot of the models that planners, designers, architects, health professionals, public health practitioners use, where we place humans in the centre and then everything else radiates off of that. What I heard from children and a more than human perspective invites us to think more of a web. More humans are one part of many parts that come together and interact and cross-reference with each other to make up the city. So I fear a little that humans remain at the centre. I think my third fear or concern is really an area of passion of mine, but the well-being of the change makers. A lot of the topics around cities and around local environments, they're political and they can be contentious and they can be politicised beyond what is necessary. I just watch and observe and have my own experiences of what it's like to be in advocating for things that are really important and that are going to benefit all in a highly volatile, funding-wise, political environment. So the well-being of the people that are doing this really important work, that's a fear or concern for me.
Fairly unusual to highlight the change makers as a point of concern, because they are just doing the work and then something changes and then they don't have to work anymore, so we don't even remember them. But they are sweating blood to make the change happen. I agree with that. What is this meaningful involvement of the young generation, and what does engagement mean to you?
Interestingly, as far as my research work goes, it was quite difficult to find or settle, even for myself, on a definition of meaningful involvement. I think a really key part of understanding meaningful involvement is stepping away from the idea just of children and young people having a voice, because I'm sure we can all imagine we can shout into the abyss and maybe no one will ever hear. And so I think meaningful involvement is not just a platform for voice, but it's actually inviting young people's input on current topics, setting up the processes and the structures that mean we shift from ideas to influence, ideas to action, ideas to change. And that's not to say that every idea or piece of input that a child or young person has needs to come to fruition. But it's about maybe not generating those ideas unless there's real potential to have influence, because just linking back to the well-being of change makers, it's emotional labour to put your ideas forward and to participate. Sure, there can certainly be learnings about being in a process, but needs to be backed up with that transparency of, okay, I'm joining in this as a young person. What could I actually change from my involvement? And if it's nothing, I need to be told that nothing can change. This is just a learning activity for me. But if I have the potential to have real influence, I need to be told that, and I need to be receiving regular feedback as that young person of, hey, these ideas are able to be progressed for these reasons, these ones potentially not for these reasons, because that's where the real learning comes in, not just the how to throw ideas forward. Somebody takes them and then things end there. A previous conversation you and I were fortunate to have, Fanny, really got me thinking of the importance of talking more about what engagement means, and so much complexity in that word. And it's a little bit loaded. There's lots of expectation and different perspectives. Guiding children and young people one particular framework from Lansdowne that I really like, and I think is just such a simple but useful frame, is to think when we're engaging, are we consulting, are we collaborating, or is it a child or community-led process? And that particular distinction has just given me so much access and really progressed my thinking and my conversations in this space, because you can do any of those things really well. Like you can engage with people, you can do great consultation, you can do great collaboration, which is where I house co-design, and you can do great child-led work. But you need to be really honest with yourself and the people you're working with about which one of those things you're doing, because consultation is coming in, you're asking your questions, and it's your prerogative whether you take any of it on board or not. It's not really a power sharing arrangement. Then we step next into collaboration. Co-design was my research specific area. There's other ways you can collaborate, but merging ideas. So you've got young people's ideas, you've got adult ideas. Maybe there's different kinds of groups within those, but there's a power sharing arrangement and you're merging ideas. Maybe some are dropping away, some are building, but that's a collaboration where both groups or multiple groups hold some power and influence. And then a child-led or a community-led process, when we think about engagement, is almost a handing over of power. There's one group that's stepping back, and whether it's children or whether it's the community, they're the ones stepping forward and they're leading the direction. It's less so a merging of ideas and more, okay, you're taking the lead now. You've got the space, you can take this in the direction you want. Maybe there's still some support there. Of course, if it's a child-led process, there will need to be adult support, particularly logistical, navigating adult processes, all those kinds of things. But as far as what engagement means, that's for me the most useful way and the most simple way practically to think about it, using those categories of consultation, collaboration, and child-led processes.
Thank you so much for the clarification, and I love the distinctions between these three different categories of engagement. Being honest and transparent with the engagement is just so important, not just for children, but for adults as well. Moving on, what are the three biggest opportunities regarding the future of cities for you?
Not surprisingly, I think that really meaningfully and purposefully engaging children and young people. I think it's an opportunity because it's a large piece that is mostly missing at the moment. There's just so much space and room to draw in young people into formal or more structured decision-making processes, but the way they contribute in those is based on their everyday participation. So how they use and experience the places that they live, work, learn and play. I think there's just so much opportunity there. And not to say there's not some amazing work being done, but to make it, I think, clearer, a little more transparent, and to make it more consistent. Previously, when we spoke about meaningful engagement, another part is that it's not once off. So looking really, how can we embed these opportunities so it's not a single co-design project or a once-off co-creation of a public space. That's amazing. But what's going to really make it meaningful into the future is embedding it. So that's a huge opportunity that I can see. I think a radical reforming to more than human thinking. And I don't use that word lightly, but I think it's certainly not the status quo. Very human-centered way of thinking at the moment. And we're nudging into different ways of thinking and being. And I think it's amazing that so many parts of the world are starting to really honour and acknowledge more Indigenous ways of knowing and being and doing. So mindful that we and everyone doesn't recolonise that and those beautiful, amazing relational ways of being in the world for Indigenous people. But I think there's huge leaps that we could all take to acknowledge humans alongside non-humans for the benefit of all moving forward. The last strength or opportunity that comes to mind, so many. There's a world of possibility, isn't there? But just the amazing people and progress and initiatives that are already happening in this space, like starting right where we are, but people like you, Fanny, hosting these sorts of conversations, getting thinkers and the change makers. And so I think the opportunity there is to just keep building on what's already happening and the momentum. We're also reaching a time where, considering what the future of cities looks like, it's not really a nice to have, it's becoming a need to have. Things are changing rapidly, urbanisation, ecological crises, like it's happening underneath us. And there is an urgency around that. But the opportunity is just to keep building on what's already happening that's amazing and forward-thinking and inclusive.
I will make a big assumption here and say that we are not currently meaningfully involving the next generation of thinkers. What do you think? Why that is?
And no, you haven't missed something. I think I would say, though, I agree, and that there's pockets and projects and areas where this is happening and it's amazing. But going back to what I shared earlier, it's certainly not embedded. It's not the norm. It's radical where it is happening. I think making it more of the norm from my research and from what is already out there in the world. Some of the challenges to maybe meaningfully and regularly involving young people are many, but some of the key ones are around a resistance to the messiness of involving children. They don't always deliver information and messages in the nice, neatly packaged with a little bow on top way that adults like. So it might involve storytelling or some fantasy aspect, some fantastical thinking, grand ideas, all of these amazing things that when we get used to being in the adult world and working in adult ways, we think, oh, what am I going to do with that information? That feels a little bit too hard. That feels tricky. So that messiness of the ideas that come and even the process, like there's loud and it's fun and it has to be creative and engaging, and that's just not a lot of people's preference for how they would like to work. So I think a challenge is resistance around that. Organisational receptivity. So there can be really passionate champions and individuals that are saying, hey, we need children's input on this topic, this place, this matter. But not always are the organisational structures in place or the support from the organisation, which links back into really the well-being of these change makers that are constantly flying that flag, needing to take care of them. Lack or being scared of power sharing. My research surfaced that there's a really strong perception that, quote, adults know better, quote. That's a really big shift, a really big perception to overcome. And I think while adults think that they know better and therefore make the decisions, it's going to be really hard to get some consistent power sharing arrangements with children in place. And there's structural shifts and individual shifts that need to happen. And thinking specifically about cities, there's often some really vocal groups that are rarely children. So groups of maybe particular age groups of residents who have more time to contribute. The processes like a community meeting that's held at 2:00 on a Tuesday, that's really set up for them to attend, less so for children to have their input. Also, for example, business owners, so maybe redeveloping a public space. There's a lot of different voices come. And so one of the challenges is making sure that children have space and have time to have their input and have their influence without being either forgotten from the start or drowned out by more vocal or some groups who have more time to contribute and be more vocal. They've got the means to do that. So I think that's another challenge there around the meaningful participation.
Really hope that we can overcome those challenges. You have been talking about the environment, the healthy environment, involving not just humans, but non-humans, plants and animals. And you haven't uttered the word sustainability. May I ask you why that is?
No particular reason. What I would reflect in terms of this question is anyone listening who's been down a research rabbit hole, there become terms and areas where you feel really comfortable and familiar, because in the research world, you need to fit your work in a particular stream and you join particular conversations. And whilst it was a feature of my thinking and of my broader writing, my particular research wasn't strongly housed in sustainability. But what I would say is I had the amazing opportunity to present some of this research, some of this work at the Transformations 2023 conference, which is all about just and sustainable futures for cities and urban environments. And so certainly top of mind in a more peripheral sense, the languaging around sustainability. But what I've shared from children is they're thinking that way. They're thinking about everyone and they're thinking about the future. And like you touched on, there's a little bit of worry there around the future. The research tells us, and children's keenness to be involved and have a say and shift things in a positive way for their future, for them today, but also for their future. I just think that highlights that sustainability is a key consideration for young people of today. And I think with all that we know, there's no denying that fact either.
When professionals I know talk about sustainability, they usually bring up the 3 pillars of sustainability: environmental, economic, and social. Personally, I would assume that public health is a freaking important part of social sustainability. But in your experience, you are not using the term itself and the thinking behind it. I have no idea. That's why I'm asking. And I would be very surprised if the thinking doesn't come through. Maybe the term just doesn't come through.
Yes, it would be an accurate assumption that it's an underpinning thought, but it wouldn't be regular terminology. Perhaps not in my circles, but it is implicit in ways such that we talk about active transport, for example, to school for children. In that conversation, sustainability is implicit, even if it's not explicit, and thinking about other things like recreation spaces, spending more time outside, developing, preserving, caring for natural resources, places. What would I reflect about my home, somewhat of public health, is the challenges are so broad and so many that I think sustainability is certainly in the mix. But public health is in a really interesting time where globalization means that we've got a rise of communicable diseases. So things like vaccinations and disease transmission, which we've all had a really recent experience of, is pressing and top of mind. And then equally on the same side, we've got a rise in non-communicable diseases, so chronic diseases that are really significantly impacting people's lives, putting huge strain on our healthcare system and also a really challenging aspect. So what I would say is so many moving parts in the public health world that I think just it's more the language of sustainability that perhaps isn't quite omnipresent and perhaps not yet. It's been a field that's had immense challenges in recent years as well, and a rediverting of resources, particularly over the last 4 years with COVID.
To be honest, I'm really glad that you are not making it even murkier with using sustainability, because sustainability can mean anything and everything for the different person. So I really appreciate that, at least in public health, you are trying to focus on more pressing issues. Which brings me to ask, because my mother is a rehabilitation doctor back in Hungary. She works in public health. And she is very not optimistic about the future, because the public health sector is not looking like it has any future in Hungary. My personal opinion, everybody can think whatever they want about the Hungarian healthcare system. But are you optimistic about the future?
Yes, I am optimistic about the future. And I think that there are emerging challenges that will continue to stretch us and force us, invite us maybe, to get really creative and innovative about how we respond. Because a reflection of mine, particularly in the public health world, is that when things get tricky, there's fiscal measures. The public health world, I'm thinking of funding and focus and staffing, all of those really broad resourcing ideas. They get drawn towards what is most urgent and most pressing. And there's parts that often fall away. And not surprisingly, connection between health and environment and local environments is one of those areas that is quite easy when you've got long waiting lists for healthcare, for the system to somewhat reorient itself around what's perceived to be more pressing. With a really long-term vision, we do need to keep that focus as well on those links between health and environment, because as the world changes around us from an environmental, natural perspective, that's going to become an even higher priority, and there'll be changes in patterns and diseases. It will all come to a head at some point. So my hope for both me and your mum and the world is that the status and the importance of public health and thinking about health really broadly beyond healthcare stays top of mind across the board.
Tiff, you have been very generous with your time and answers. What is your role in establishing the future of cities?
This is a great prompt, and one that I guess really has me thinking. Something that's been a part of my practice for a long time is sitting at that intersection of research and of practice. And I have yet to feel fully committed to one of those worlds. So I love that intersection of health and environment, but also of research and practice. So whether that's inviting communities into being a part of research initiatives to gather more systemic data or information, and then when I've had more feet in the research camp, thinking about how does this relate to practice? How does this information find the people who need it? How do we make sure that the questions that we as researchers are asking is relevant to people who are doing this work and are living these problems and concerns every day? So I think my interest and my role really still lies at that intersection of research and practice.
And please keep up this good work, because finding the connection between health and the environment is so important. And then we are not just firefighting, but also being proactive with our health. So I so appreciate this kind of bridging. Do you have any closing comments or requests for the audience?
I do. I would like to frame it, if I may, as, I guess, another invitation, which would be for listeners to think where they could engage a child or a young person by inviting their input, maybe on something that they wouldn't have previously thought to ask a child or young person about, or that they might feel a little bit challenged if they ask them about it, or where they think they could have some really valuable or interesting ideas. And I think this works at every scale. So there needs to be structural change and individual change. But engaging with that young person, maybe it's at home, maybe it's in the wider family, maybe it's in your work. So just starting to spark some of those conversations so that we can begin to trust and to elevate young people's voices, because how we respond and we role model that then catalyzes that for other people. As some adults trust and elevate children's voice, it then gives permission for others to do the same, because they're seeing it role modelled and they're getting to experience the benefits and the amazing insights children have to offer. So that's my invitation, to engage with a child or a young person and see what they have to share.
Thank you so much, Tiff.
Thank you for having me, Fanny. It's been a pleasure.
It was really interesting to hear from Tiff about the different kinds of engagement, not to mention her description for engaging with children. Kelly Busher talked about an even younger cohort in episode 114. You can find out more about Tiff online. All the links are in the show notes. What was the most interesting part for you? What questions did arise regarding Tiff's approach to the future of cities? What have you learned from this interview? Let me know on Twitter at WTF4Cities or on the WTF4Cities.com website, where the transcript and show notes are available. You can also subscribe on the website not to miss any new episodes and leave some feedback. I hope this was an interesting interview for you as well, and thanks for tuning in.
What is the Future for Cities podcast?